All right, let's jump right into one of the most intense scenes in the entire book of Revelation. It's the collapse of this massive system the text calls Babylon. Now, think bigger than just a city. This is a symbol for a global economic and spiritual empire, a system so powerful, so all-encompassing, that its collapse literally brings the world's most powerful people to their knees. And that leads us to the central mystery here. I mean, can you picture it? The most powerful traders, these titans of global commerce, the people who move markets and shape the world, are all openly weeping and mourning? Why? What on earth could happen to bring a system that seemed totally invincible to a sudden screeching halt? The text from Revelation 18 gives us a chillingly simple answer. This isn't just a market correction or a slow recession. It's a full stop. It's like someone just flipped a switch. The market is closed for good, because as it says, no one is buying their merchandise anymore. Their entire world, everything they built on profit and trade, has just, poof, vanished. So to really understand why this is such a catastrophe for them, we have to look at what was actually being sold. What was the cargo? What were the goods that made this marketplace so incredibly rich and powerful? Because the list itself, well, it tells a fascinating story. The sheer scale of this inventory is just staggering. This isn't one specific industry. It's everything. You've got the obvious luxury goods, right? Gold, silver, pearls. You have the finest fabrics. You have exotic materials like ivory and fine wood. And then you have everyday staples, wine, oil, and wheat. It even includes the tools of power and war, horses and chariots. This was a total commercial empire. But the list doesn't stop there. And this is the line that changes absolutely everything. After this long list of all the physical goods you can imagine, the text adds this final chilling item. And the souls of men. And right there, it hits you. This was never just a physical marketplace. They were trafficking in something far, far more precious. This was a spiritual system, and it was built on exploitation. So this brings us to this core idea of a religious economy. What is that? Well, it's what happens when the sacred gets turned into a product. It's when things that are supposed to be about connecting with God, rituals, forgiveness, worship, get packaged and sold for money, or used as tools to control people. The temple, in other words, has become a marketplace. Now, what's really interesting is that this idea of a super wealthy, prideful commercial power that meets a sudden, shocking end, it's not a new concept. The author of Revelation is actually reaching back into the Old Testament and pulling from a much older story to make his point. The connection becomes undeniable when you put the texts side by side. On the left, you've got the cargo list from the lament over ancient Tyre from the book of Ezekiel, and on the right, the list from Revelation. I mean, look at that overlap. Silver, ivory, fine clothes, horses, chariots, even slaves. The parallel is just crystal clear. But then you spot it again. That one crucial addition in Revelation, and souls of men. It takes Tyre's sin of commercial greed and elevates it to a whole other level, a spiritual crime. The merchants who mourned ancient Tyre cried out, "What city is like this one?" They couldn't believe it was gone. To them, it was invincible. You could just feel the shock in their voices. And that's exactly the feeling the author of Revelation wants to evoke, but for a system that's even bigger, even more corrupt than Tyre ever was. Okay, so this idea of a religious economy might still feel a bit abstract, but we see a perfect real-world example of it in a very famous scene from the Gospels, when Jesus comes face-to-face with this exact system. This was the ideal, right? This was the whole point. The temple was meant to be a secret space, a house of prayer, a place for communion with God. Its entire purpose was worship, not business. But this was the reality. And Jesus' condemnation is just brutal. He doesn't say you've made it a marketplace. He says you've made it a den of thieves. This wasn't just commerce, it was theft. It was an exploitative system that took advantage of people's desire for God and turned it into profit. And this is the very system that Revelation shows being judged and destroyed on a global scale. And this really gets to the heart of the matter. You have to understand, the merchants in Revelation, they aren't weeping because they've sinned. They're not mourning because something holy was corrupted. No, they're weeping because their revenue stream just dried up. Their sorrow is purely economic. They're mourning the loss of their exploitative business, not the sin that fueled it. So how does this all end for them? Well, it's not a gradual decline. It's sudden, it's total, and it's absolute. In fact, the speed of the collapse is one of the most important parts of the whole story. In 1 hour. Now, this doesn't mean a literal 60 minutes. It's biblical language for something that happens with sudden, decisive, and irreversible judgment. A system that took centuries, maybe millennia to build, an empire that seemed absolutely permanent is just gone. In a moment.
And what about the merchants, the ones who got rich off this system? The text says they stand afar off. Think about that. These are the people who were once at the very center of it all, reaping the benefits. But now that it's all collapsing, they don't want to be anywhere near it. They are terrified of getting caught in the same judgment. It's this powerful image of people frantically backing away from the very thing that made them who they were.
So, what's the bottom line here? Let's boil it all down. First, a religious economy is any system that puts a price tag on faith. Second, it's a system that always gets its priorities backward. It chooses profit over prayer, control over real communion. And maybe most importantly, this whole story is a powerful warning. Any system, no matter how powerful or permanent it seems, is incredibly fragile if it's built on a foundation of human greed. It's destined to fall.
And that really leaves us with one last question to think about. In our own lives, in our own institutions, what's the line? What is it that separates a genuine house of prayer from a spiritual marketplace? That's a question really worth wrestling with.